The gunshots echo ripped through the Montana twilight just as Zadie Zimmer saw the silhouette of her husband fall from his horse. The year was 1876, and at 23 years of age, she became a widow in the harsh territory that had promised them a new beginning. Thomas. She screamed, her voice drowned by the pounding of hoofbeats as the cattle rustlers disappeared into the gathering darkness. 6 months pregnant, and 2 days' ride from the nearest town, Zadie felt her world collapse beneath the vast, uncaring sky. The journey from Philadelphia had been Thomas's dream, a cattle ranch in the Western Territories where they could build something from nothing. Now, as she buried her husband beneath a lone cottonwood tree, that dream lay as cold and still as his body. Zadie had never felt more alone, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other clutching a locket containing a portrait of Thomas on their wedding day just over a year ago. She had packed what supplies she could onto their remaining horse and prepared to head toward Timber Creek, the nearest settlement. She'd made it halfway there when the early winter storm hit. The snow came without warning, turning the prairie into a blinding white void. Zadie's horse struggled against the howling wind, each step becoming more labored than the last. When the animal finally collapsed, Zadie knew she would die out here, she and her unborn child forgotten beneath the Montana snow. As consciousness began to slip away, she thought she heard hoofbeats cutting through the storm. Strong arms lifted her from the ground, and she caught a glimpse of a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat before darkness took her. Sawyer Hawkins had been tracking the rustlers for 3 days when the storm forced him to abandon the hunt. At 32, he had spent most of his adult life as a ranch hand, cowboy, and occasionally, when necessity demanded, a hunter of men. The badge he wore as deputy of Timber Creek was new, pinned to his coat just 6 months earlier when Sheriff Mills decided he needed help taming the growing settlement. The woman he found half buried in snow looked dead already, but the slight rise and fall of her chest told him otherwise. When he noticed her condition, he spurred his horse toward his cabin with renewed urgency. Zadie awoke to warmth and the crackling sound of fire. For a moment, she thought herself back in Philadelphia, in her parents' home, but the rough-hewn logs of the cabin ceiling quickly dispelled that notion. She tried to sit up, panic rising as memories flooded back. "Easy now," came a deep voice from across the room. "You've been through quite an ordeal." A tall man approached, his movements deliberate and cautious, as if afraid of startling her. His face was tanned by sun and wind, with lines at the corners of blue eyes that suggested both laughter and hardship. Dark hair peppered with gray was pushed back from a high forehead, and a neatly trimmed beard covered a strong jaw. "My baby," Zadie whispered, her hands flying to her abdomen. "Seems fine, far as I can tell," the stranger said, a hint of relief in his voice. "I've sent word to town for the doctor, but it'll be a few days before anyone can get through this weather." "Who are you?" she asked, pulling the blankets closer around her shoulders. "Sawyer Hawkins." "Deputy of Timber Creek." He paused, studying her face. "And you might be, Zadie Zimmer, my husband and I." Her voice caught. "My husband was killed 3 days ago. Rustlers." Sawyer's expression darkened. "These rustlers, they have a man with a red bandana, rides a paint horse." Zadie nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "You know them. I've been tracking them. They've hit 3 ranches in the last month." He sat on a chair near the bed. "I'm sorry about your husband, Mrs. Zimmer. No one should have to face that, especially not in your condition." The storm raged for 4 days, confining them to Sawyer's small cabin. He slept on a pallet by the fire, giving Zadie the only bed. Each morning he checked on his horses in the small attached stable, chopped wood, and prepared simple meals that he insisted she eat for the baby's sake. On the fifth morning, when the snow had stopped and the sun broke through, Zadie found him standing on the porch, staring out at the pristine white landscape. "When the trail clears, you'll take me to Timber Creek?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cold. Sawyer turned, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Zimmer, I've been thinking on that. Timber Creek's no place for a woman alone, especially one expecting. The town's growing fast, too fast. Lots of rough men, few families." "I have nowhere else to go," Zadie said, her voice small against the vast silence of the snow-covered prairie. "My parents died of fever last year. It was just Thomas and me, and now—" "You had a ranch with your husband," Zadie nodded, "north of here. We'd only just begun building. The house wasn't even finished when—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Sawyer looked away as if gathering his thoughts. "I need to go after these rustlers. They've caused enough harm, but I can't in good conscience leave you in town alone. The boarding house is no better than a saloon most nights." "What choice do I have?" Zadie asked, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "You could stay here," Sawyer said, the words coming out in a rush. "My cabin's nothing fancy, but it's solid, safe. I'd be gone most days, but—" He stopped, suddenly uncomfortable. "Forgive me, it's not proper to suggest such a thing." "No," Zadie agreed, though part of her welcomed the idea of not facing strangers in her condition. It wouldn't be proper. In the end, propriety yielded to practicality. The doctor, who finally arrived from Timber Creek, confirmed that Zadie was in no condition to travel far, and that moving into town might put unnecessary strain on her and the baby. With reluctance, he agreed that Sawyer's cabin was the safest place for her until after the birth. To preserve her reputation, Sawyer moved his bedroll to the stable, despite Zadie's protests about the bitter cold. Sheriff Mills, who accompanied the doctor, promised to spread word that Deputy Hawkins was providing shelter to a newly widowed woman as a matter of official duty. Nothing more. As the weeks passed, Zadie found herself settling into a routine. She took over the cooking, grateful to have something to do with her hands. Sawyer continued his duties, often leaving before dawn and returning after dark, but always bringing supplies, news, and occasionally a book or newspaper from town. They rarely spoke of personal matters, maintaining a careful distance that belied their intimate living arrangement. But Zadie noticed how Sawyer's eyes sometimes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking, and how he seemed to find reasons to delay his departure each morning. One evening, in late January, as a fresh snowfall blanketed the world outside, Sawyer returned with news. "We caught them," he said, stomping snow from his boots at the door. "The rustlers, all 6 of them." Zadie looked up from the stew she was stirring, her heart suddenly racing. "All of them," Sawyer nodded, hanging his coat and hat on pegs by the door. "Judge Taylor's coming from Helena next month for the trial. You'll need to testify if you're up to it." "I'll testify," Zadie said firmly. "I want to see the faces of the men who took Thomas from me." Sawyer crossed the room to stand near the fire, warming his hands. "There's something else. I rode out to your ranch today." Zadie stilled, the wooden spoon hovering over the pot. "And it's still there. The foundation, the partial walls. The livestock is gone, of course, but the land." He paused. "It's good land, Mrs. Zimmer. With the right help, it could be something." "I can't go back there," Zadie whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "Not alone." "You wouldn't have to be alone," Sawyer said softly, then cleared his throat. "What I mean is, there are men in town looking for work. Honest men who could help rebuild." Zadie shook her head, setting the spoon down as she struggled to find words. "I have no money to pay workers, Mr. Hawkins. The little we had went into buying the land and materials. I've got nothing to offer anyone." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of her despair. Sawyer looked at her for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You've got everything," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Land, courage, a future." His gaze dropped briefly to her belly. "A family." Zadie felt something shift inside her, not the baby, but something deeper, something she had thought died with Thomas. "I don't understand." Sawyer took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it and retreated. "I apologize. I've overstepped." "No," Zadie said quickly. "Please, tell me what you're thinking." Sawyer ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Zadie had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "I've been a wanderer most of my life, Mrs. Zimmer, never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots. But lately—" He looked around the cabin, his gaze finally settling on her. "Lately, I've been thinking it might be time for that to change." The baby chose that moment to kick hard enough for Zadie to gasp, breaking the tension. Sawyer looked alarmed until she laughed softly. "He's quite active today," she explained, placing a hand on her belly. "He?" Sawyer asked, the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Or she," Zadie amended. "I don't know for certain, of course." An awkward silence fell, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional howl of wind outside. Finally, Sawyer cleared his throat. "I should check on the horses," he said, already reaching for his coat. "Sawyer," Zadie called as he reached the door. It was the first time she had used his given name, and it stopped him in his tracks. "Thank you for everything." He nodded once, unable to meet her eyes, and slipped out into the cold night. The baby came 2 weeks later in the middle of a clear, frigid night. Sawyer rode for the doctor in town, pushing his horse through snowdrifts with desperate urgency. By the time they returned, Zadie's labor had progressed too far to move her. "I'll wait outside," Sawyer said, his face pale with worry as the doctor took charge. "No," Zadie gasped between contractions, reaching for his hand. "Stay, please." Hours later, as dawn broke over the eastern horizon, Emma Rose Zimmer entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the small cabin. Sawyer, who had remained steadfast through Zadie's labor, holding her hand and wiping her brow, looked at the tiny red-faced infant with a mixture of awe and terror. "She's perfect," Zadie whispered, cradling her daughter against her chest. "She is," Sawyer agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mother." The doctor, packing his supplies, gave Sawyer a knowing look. "I'll be back to check on them in a few days. Take good care of them, Deputy." After the doctor left, Sawyer moved to leave the room to give Zadie privacy, but she called him back. "I want to go to the trial," she said, her eyes meeting his with determination. "Zadie, you just had a baby. In 3 weeks the judge arrives. Emma and I will be strong enough by then." She adjusted the sleeping infant in her arms. "I need to do this, Sawyer, for Thomas, for Emma." Sawyer nodded slowly. "All right, but not alone. I'll be with you every step." The courthouse in Helena was packed when the trial began. Zadie sat in the front row, Emma bundled in her arms, Sawyer a protective presence beside her. One by one, the rustlers were brought in, chains rattling as they shuffled to their seats. When Zadie was called to testify, Sawyer took Emma from her arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. Standing before the judge and jury, Zadie recounted the day Thomas was murdered, her voice steady even as tears streamed down her face. "And you can identify the man who shot your husband?" the prosecutor asked. Zadie pointed without hesitation to a hard-faced man with a scar running along his jawline. "That one. He wore a red bandana." The trial lasted 3 days. When the verdict of guilty was announced and the sentence of hanging passed, Zadie felt no triumph, only a hollow sense of completion. As they left the courthouse, Sawyer's hand at the small of her back, she realized she had to decide what came next. "I want to see the ranch," she said suddenly as they prepared to return to Timber Creek. "Our ranch. I need to know if I can go back." Sawyer studied her face, then nodded. We'll go tomorrow. The land looked different in early spring. The snow melted to reveal green shoots pushing through the soil. The half-built house stood as a skeletal reminder of Thomas's interrupted dream, but Zadie found it didn't hurt as much as she'd expected to see it. He was going to build a porch there, she said, pointing, so we could watch the sunset over the mountains. Sawyer stood beside her, Emma sleeping against his chest in a sling Zadie had fashioned. It's a good spot for it. Zadie turned to face him, the wind whipping her hair around her face. I've been thinking about what you said, about having everything. Sawyer's expression remained carefully neutral. Have you? Yes, she took a deep breath. I want to rebuild, Sawyer. I want to make this place what Thomas and I dreamed it could be, for Emma, for myself. That's good, Sawyer said, his voice soft. You're strong enough to do it. Not alone, Zadie replied, taking a step closer to him. I'll need help. You'll have it, he promised. Whatever you need. What if, Zadie began, then faltered, gathering her courage before continuing. What if what I need is you? Sawyer went very still, his eyes searching her face. Zadie, I know it's too soon, she hurried on. I know I should mourn Thomas longer. But life out here is too short and too hard to deny what I'm feeling. She reached out to touch Emma's downy head, her fingers brushing against Sawyer's chest. When I lost Thomas, I thought my heart died with him, but you've shown me it's still beating. Sawyer's free hand came up to capture hers, holding it against his chest so she could feel his heartbeat. I've tried to keep my distance to respect your grief, but every day, watching you care for Emma, seeing your strength, I've fallen in love with you, Zadie Zimmer, both of you. And I with you, Zadie whispered, her voice catching. Is it wrong to find love again so soon? I think, Sawyer said carefully, that Thomas would want you and Emma to be happy and safe. I can't replace him, wouldn't try to, but I promise to honor his memory by taking care of what he loved most. Zadie stood on tiptoe and pressed her lips gently to his, a brief touch that held the promise of more. Then help me rebuild this place. Help me raise Emma. Be my partner, Sawyer Hawkins. Are you proposing to me, Mrs. Zimmer? Sawyer asked, a smile spreading across his face. I believe I am, Deputy, Zadie replied, returning his smile. What do you say? I say yes. He leaned down to kiss her again, longer this time, until Emma squirmed between them with a tiny protest. They broke apart, laughing. She has her opinions already, Zadie said, stroking her daughter's cheek. Strong-willed like her mother, Sawyer agreed. They married in May, a simple ceremony in Timber Creek's newly built church. Sheriff Mills gave Zadie away, and the doctor's wife held Emma during the vows. Sawyer resigned his deputy position to become a full-time rancher, though he occasionally assisted the sheriff when needed. Together, they finished building the house, adding the porch where they sat each evening, watching the sunset as Thomas had envisioned. By the time Emma took her first steps across the plank floor, the ranch was beginning to prosper, with a small herd of cattle and fields of wheat ripening in the summer sun. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, Zadie and Sawyer took Emma to visit his grave beneath the cottonwood tree. Zadie placed wildflowers on the wooden marker while Sawyer held Emma, now a sturdy toddler with her mother's dark curls and her father's determination. I want her to know about him, Zadie said as they walked back toward the house. About Thomas and the dream he had for this place. She will, Sawyer promised, setting Emma down to toddle between them, each holding one of her hands. We'll make sure of it. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sawyer found Zadie standing on the porch, staring up at the stars that spangled the vast Montana sky. Any regrets? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Zadie leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Only that Thomas didn't get to see Emma grow up, but no regrets about us. Sawyer pressed a kiss to her temple. "I have something to tell you." Zadie turned in his arms, looking up at him curiously. "What is it?" "Sheriff Mills rode out today while you were at the creek with Emma. The last of the rustlers escaped from prison last week." Zadie tensed. "Do they think he'll come here?" "It's possible," Sawyer admitted. "Mills wanted us to be aware, take precautions." "We should leave," Zadie said, fear evident in her voice. "Take Emma somewhere safe." "This is our home," Sawyer said firmly. "We've built it together. I won't let anyone drive us from it." Zadie looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right. This is our land, our life." "I'll keep watch tonight," Sawyer said, kissing her softly. "Go get some rest." 3 days later, as Zadie was hanging laundry while Emma napped inside, she noticed a rider approaching from the east. She shaded her eyes against the sun, her heart racing when she recognized the red bandana around the man's neck. Sawyer was in the north pasture, too far to call. The rifle was in the house, near Emma's crib. Zadie dropped the wet sheet and ran for the door, reaching it just as the rider galloped into the yard. "Mrs. Zimmer," the man called, his voice carrying the same harsh tone she remembered from the day Thomas died. "Or is it Mrs. Hawkins now? I've been hearing stories." Zadie stood in the doorway, blocking access to her sleeping daughter. "What do you want?" "Justice," the man said, dismounting but keeping his distance. "Your testimony sent my brothers to the gallows. Seems only fair I return the favor." "My husband is armed," Zadie warned, though Sawyer was nowhere in sight. "And the sheriff knows you've escaped." The rustler laughed, a cold sound that sent chills down Zadie's spine. "By the time anyone gets here, I'll be long gone, and you'll be joining your first husband." He took a step toward her, and Zadie backed into the house, slamming the door and dropping the bar into place. She ran to the bedroom, grabbed the rifle, and checked that it was loaded as Sawyer had taught her. Emma still slept peacefully, unaware of the danger. The sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen, and Zadie positioned herself in the hallway, rifle raised. When the rustler appeared in the doorway, she fired without hesitation. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him. He cursed, drawing his own pistol as Zadie worked the lever to chamber another round. Before either could fire again, the front door burst open and Sawyer charged in, his own gun drawn. "Drop it," he commanded, his voice deadly calm. "Now." The wounded rustler turned, firing wildly. The bullet splintered the door frame near Sawyer's head. Sawyer fired once, hitting the man square in the chest. He fell backward, his pistol clattering to the floor. Emma's wails filled the house as the gunshots woke her. Zadie ran to the bedroom, scooping up her daughter while Sawyer checked to make sure the rustler was dead. "You're safe," Zadie murmured into Emma's hair, her own heart pounding. "You're safe, my love." Sawyer appeared in the doorway, his face etched with concern. "Are you hurt, either of you?" Zadie shook her head, tears of relief streaming down her face. "We're all right. I heard him coming and got to the rifle in time." Sawyer crossed the room in 3 strides, enfolding both of them in his arms. "I heard the shot and thought." He couldn't finish the sentence, burying his face in Zadie's hair instead. "I'm stronger than I look," Zadie said, managing a shaky smile. "You taught me well." Later, after Sheriff Mills had taken the body away and the broken window had been boarded up, Zadie and Sawyer sat on their porch in the gathering dusk, Emma sleeping peacefully between them. "I was so afraid," Zadie admitted, her hand seeking his. "Not of dying, but of leaving Emma without a mother, of leaving you." Sawyer squeezed her hand. "You're the bravest person I've ever known, Zadie Hawkins. From the moment I found you in that snowstorm, half dead but still fighting to protect your baby, I knew you were special." "We protected each other today," Zadie said. "That's what family does," Sawyer nodded, his gaze drifting to the mountains turning purple in the fading light. "I've been thinking about expanding the ranch. Adding sheep, maybe. And the house we could add on, make room for more children." "More children?" Zadie asked, a smile playing at her lips. Sawyer looked slightly abashed. "If you want them, eventually." "I do," Zadie said, leaning her head against his shoulder, "but not eventually." Sawyer turned to look at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You mean?" Zadie nodded, her smile widening. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. Come winter, Emma will have a little brother or sister." Sawyer let out a whoop that startled a flock of birds from a nearby tree, then caught himself, glancing guiltily at the still sleeping Emma. He lowered his voice to a whisper. "A baby, our baby." "Our baby," Zadie confirmed, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our family growing just like our ranch." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, talking of the future of children running through fields of wheat, of cattle drives and harvest festivals, of growing old together beneath the big Montana sky. And when Sawyer carried a still sleeping Emma to her bed, then returned to sweep Zadie into his arms, carrying her to their own room with a tenderness that belied his strength, Zadie knew that what she had once thought was an ending had only been the beginning of a greater love story. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Sawyer would always begin the tale the same way. "I found your mother in a snowstorm, half frozen but fighting with every breath to protect your sister. And that's when I knew she was the strongest, most beautiful woman in all the territories." And Zadie would smile, remembering the broken young widow who once believed she had nothing to offer, and the cowboy who saw everything in her that she couldn't yet see in herself.